The Vanishing Camper. In a forest so dense that the sun hesitated to penetrate its canopy, there was a remote campsite notorious for its swirling mists and stories that unsettled even the bravest of hearts. Jake, a man whose feet were firmly planted in the world of the tangible, laughed off local legends as he secured the last stake of his tent into the soft earth. Beside him, Mia, with her hair like the night and eyes full of stars, hummed a tune that seemed to belong to another time. Their first evening was spent under a sky embroidered with constellations, around a crackling fire that fought back the chill of the surrounding darkness. As they roasted marshmallows, Mia's voice danced with the wind as she recounted tales of hikers who stepped into the woods and slipped into legend. Jake, ever the skeptic, teased her about her fascination with the supernatural, attributing the disappearances to nothing more than wild animals and unfortunate missteps. However, that night, as the embers died and the lovers fell asleep, whispers crept into their campsite. They wove through the tent flaps, slithering between the couple, and for a moment, Mia's dreams were filled with voices that beckoned her to step outside. The following morning broke with a silence that pressed down on Jake's chest. He blinked, his eyes open to an empty tent and a pit of worry in his stomach. "Mia," he called, but his voice seemed smothered by the fog that clung to the fabric of their shelter. Outside, the world was a grayscale painting, the colors leached away by the mist. Mia was nowhere in sight. Jake's mind raced through logical explanations as he searched the campsite. It was when he saw the circle of stones, each one placed with an intention that bordered on the ceremonial, that his pulse began to quicken. In the center of the circle, the earth looked disturbed, as if something, or someone, had been taken by the soil itself. Panicked, Jake rummaged through their belongings, his hands closing around a leather-bound journal that certainly wasn't theirs. It was aged, the pages yellowed and the writing faded. The last entry, dated back to the 1970s, was of another camper, an avid hiker who had come to the park to face the wilderness but had instead encountered the whispers. The final words sent a chill through Jake's spine. The stones are more than stones, and the mist more than mist. As the hours ticked by, Jake's skepticism was whittled away by fear. He recalled Mia's words about the ancient rituals of the land. With each whisper that slithered in the air, he felt the presence of those who had vanished before, their voices a mosaic of warnings and pleas. The forest was a living, breathing entity, and it was indifferent to the fates of those who tread upon its roots. The sun dipped low, cowardly hiding behind the horizon as night approached. Jake sat in the center of the stone circle, the whispers now loud enough to be the echoes of past victims. They beckoned him to give in, to accept the forest's embrace. But Jake wasn't ready to become another ghost in the mist. He spoke into the whispering wind, telling Mia that he didn't believe the legends, but that he believed in her. And as the night grew darker, he hoped that wherever she was, she could feel his determination. The video would fade to black here, leaving the viewers to wonder if Jake ever saw Mia again, if he himself escaped the forest, or if he too became part of the whispers that would haunt the next unwary campers. The silence following the story would be an invitation to let their imaginations fill in the gaps. The eerie atmosphere a lingering presence long after the screen had dimmed. The Watcher in the Woods. The woods were silent that evening, the kind of silence that feels like a held breath. Sarah, the park ranger whose green eyes were as much a part of the forest as the pines and the hawks, walked the edge of the lake where the fog lay like a thick blanket, undisturbed. She knew every trail, every clearing of this park, but even she felt a shiver of unease in this quiet. Paul, a fisherman whose memories were as knotted as the nets he cast, stood by the water, his gaze lost in the white mist. His brother had gone missing in these woods, and the only trace of him was a note as cryptic as a riddle, eyes that see through time, it read. The two had come together in a search that felt more like a ghost hunt, wandering through a landscape where every shadow could be a clue. Sarah, with her practical mind, did her best to keep the search grounded, focusing on the tangible, footprints, broken branches, disturbances in the underbrush. But then came the photograph. A picture Paul's brother had snapped the day he disappeared. Its film developed from an old camera found by the lakeside. They unrolled the photo to see a background of dense woods. But there in the foreground was a distorted silhouette, human-like yet stretched and twisted, as if the camera had captured something our eyes weren't meant to see. "That's no person," Paul muttered, his face the color of ash. Sarah studied the tracks they found later, large and clawed, leading into the heart of the forest. "Bears don't walk on two legs," she said, her voice a mix of wonder and fear. The tracks led them in a relentless march, deeper into the gloom, until the world was nothing but shadows and fog. Night fell like a curtain, swift and final. The fog grew thicker, the lake a mirror reflecting the heavy clouds above. Sarah and Paul set up a makeshift camp, the fire a small fortress of light against the closing dark. They spoke little, but their minds were loud with thoughts. Paul's memories of his brother clashed with Sarah's instincts, telling her that some mysteries were not meant to be solved. The forest seemed to watch them, a million unseen eyes in the dark, and the note's words haunted their thoughts, eyes that see through time. The fire crackled, a spark flying into the night, and then it came, the sound of something large moving just beyond the light's reach. They grasped for their flashlights, beams piercing the darkness, finding nothing. Then again, the sound, closer this time, a reality that was undeniable. "Something's out there," Sarah whispered, her hand on the bear spray at her belt. Paul nodded, his hand trembling as he clutched a fishing knife. "It's looking for something, or someone." The pursuit began as a game of cat and mouse, the entity in the woods toying with them, never seen, but always felt. It circled their camp, each round drawing closer, the air charged with a dread that sank into their bones. Sarah thought of all the animals she knew, trying to match the sounds to a creature, but nothing in her rational mind could explain this. The steps were too deliberate, the breathing too heavy, like the forest itself had come alive with a singular purpose: to watch, to stalk, to terrify. Paul stood back to back with Sarah, the two of them scanning the dark, jumping at every crackle and rustle. "We should never have come here," Paul said, the image of his brother's fate a weight in his heart. Then, in a moment of stillness, they felt it, a gaze upon them, oppressive and ancient. A shadow loomed at the edge of the firelight, tall and imposing, its outline blurred by the fog. Eyes glinted in the dark, reflecting the firelight like mirrors. "We need to go," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the tremor of fear. Now, they grabbed their essentials and bolted. The entities pursued a cacophony of crashes through the underbrush. They didn't dare look back. The fire left to die as they fled through the night, guided by the dim glow of their flashlights and the adrenaline-fueled need to survive. The chase seemed to stretch for hours, until they broke free from the tree line, spilling onto the main road that cut through the park. They didn't stop running until they reached the ranger station, locking themselves inside. Dawn broke, revealing an untouched forest, the lake calm, and the fog lifted. Sarah and Paul emerged, their eyes wary and searching. There were no tracks, no signs of the entity that had hunted them. "What was it?" Paul asked, his voice hollow. "I don't know," Sarah replied. "But it's old, Paul. Older than any of us. And it's part of this land." They parted ways, but the forest remained, silent and watchful. Sarah continued her patrols, and Paul never stopped looking for his brother, the mystery unsolved, hanging in the air like the eternal fog of the lake. The story ended with a shot of the empty woods, the camera lingering on a pair of gleaming eyes that seemed to appear and disappear with the shift of the light, leaving the viewers with a feeling of unfinished business, of a predator still at large in the woods, and of the eternal presence of the watcher in the woods. The Lost Children. The dare was simple: spend the night at the old campgrounds where stories were whispered of, children's laughter heard in the dead of night. The local kids, fueled by bravado and the thrill of potential YouTube fame, were up to the challenge. Among them were Tasha, whose courage was as renowned as her fiery red hair, and Colin, with glasses perpetually perched on his nose and a backpack filled with ghost hunting gadgets he'd cobbled together. The campgrounds lay abandoned, a place where the wind sang through broken swing chains and the merry-go-round was silenced by rust. Legends said the land was cursed, a place of tragedy from years past, where children had vanished into the embrace of the forest, never to be seen again. As night wrapped its velvet cloak around the world, the teens set up their cameras, the glow of their screens a tether to the modern world. They laughed and joked, the eerie atmosphere a backdrop to their staged bravery. But as darkness deepened, so did the sense of isolation. It began with a creak, a slow, rhythmic groan of metal. The merry-go-round stirred to life, spinning as if pushed by unseen hands. Tasha and Colin exchanged nervous glances, their hearts beating a rapid tattoo. This was not part of the dare. The laughter came next, ethereal and light, a haunting melody that seemed to rise from the very earth. The teens' smiles faltered, their eyes wide as they searched the shadows for the source. But there was nothing but the flicker of their flashlights and the cold dread settling in their stomachs. They found the belongings scattered around the campground: a small, scuffed shoe, a tattered doll, a rusted toy truck, items that spoke of innocence and play, long forgotten. Colin picked up a diary, its pages yellowed with age, the last entry a chilling prelude to disappearance. As the night wore on, One of their number, Alex, wandered away from the campfire's safety, his voice joining the laughter until it faded into the distance. Panic set in, the group frantically searching, calling his name into the indifferent night. Hours passed, and as suddenly as he had left, Alex returned, his eyes vacant, his memory of the past hours wiped clean as a slate. He spoke in riddles, his words a jumble of past and present. The forest around them seemed to close in, the trees whispering secrets in a language too ancient to understand. The laughter of the lost children grew louder, a siren call that tugged at their souls, inviting them to join the dance of shadows. Tasha, her fear a tight knot in her throat, took charge, her voice a command to stay together, to resist the call of the laughter. Colin, though shaking, set up his equipment, hoping to capture proof of the supernatural. The cameras flickered, screens glitching with static, as if the very air was charged with the power of the lost spirits. And then, the unthinkable. On the LCD screens, the faint images of children appeared, their outlines blurred, their eyes empty pools reflecting the moonlight. The teenagers were frozen, caught in the grip of a horror that was all too real. The ghosts of the children beckoned, their hands outstretched, their laughter a chilling lullaby that promised an end to all fears, an end to all things. Tasha felt a pull, a desire to step forward, to accept the ghostly invitation. But she resisted, her will a steel thread holding her to the world of the living. Colin, his gadgets now useless, clutched a camera to his chest, the recorded evidence of their encounter a weighty responsibility. The teens huddled together as the night stretched on, the laughter and visions an unending torment. They whispered promises to each other, pledges to leave at first light, to never speak of this night again. But the night was a chasm, and dawn a distant dream. The children's laughter wove through their thoughts, a melody of madness and sorrow. And when the first rays of sunlight finally pierced the darkness, the laughter faded, the visions dissolved, and the campgrounds were silent once more. The teens emerged from the night changed. They spoke little of what occurred, the pact of silence unspoken but understood. Their cameras told a tale of shadows and sounds, but the true depth of their fear remained their own. The story of the lost children lingered, a tragedy timeless and deep, and the laughter in the woods became a legend, a warning to those who would dare the darkness. For some things are lost forever, and some places hold on to the sins of the past with a grip that not even daylight can loosen. The unseen force. The park was a green labyrinth of twisting paths and ancient trees, a place where even the sunlight seemed to lose its way. But it was the anomalies that drew Helen, a scientist with an ironclad skepticism and a passion for unraveling the mysteries of the natural world. Her assistant, Greg, a recent graduate with a penchant for tech, followed her like a shadow, documenting every unexplainable magnetic spike and glitch on their equipment. They had heard the rumors, compasses that spun wildly, cell phones that drained in minutes, and watches that stopped dead. It was an ideal anomaly to study, unexplained phenomena ripe for a rational explanation. But the trail they followed seemed almost resentful of their intrusion. Overgrown branches snatching at their clothes, roots rising up to trip their steps. Their equipment, state-of-the-art and reliable in any other setting, flickered and warbled, screens freezing before displaying numbers that made no sense. Greg's camera, a lifeline to capture their findings, shut down with a whine despite its full battery. But it was the force, unseen but undeniably felt, that transformed their mission from one of discovery to one of survival. It began as a pressure on their backs, a gentle push urging them forward, guiding them off the marked trails and deeper into the park's untamed heart. Helen, ever the scientist, tried to rationalize the sensation. It must be a shift in the magnetic field, she posited, affecting our nervous system. Greg nodded, but his eyes betrayed his fear, darting to the shadows between the trees as if expecting them to come alive. Then there was the apparition. It flickered at the edge of their vision, a wisp of white, like mist shaped like a human. When they turned to look, it vanished, only to reappear farther down the path, an ethereal guide beckoning them on. They found the grave at twilight, a simple stone half swallowed by the earth, its inscription worn away by time. The ghostly figure stood over it, pointing, and with a blink, it was gone, leaving a chill hanging in the air. Helen knelt by the stone, her instruments silent now, as if they too held their breath. Greg looked around, the fading light casting long shadows. "Do you think it's true?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper, about the witch. The legend was as old as the town itself. A woman accused, tried, and executed for witchcraft, buried in unconsecrated ground somewhere within the park's expanse. They said she cursed the land as she died, her rage a blight that would linger through the ages. As the darkness closed in, so too did the force. It was no longer just a suggestion, it was insistent, desperate. It tugged at Helen's hair, clawed at Greg's back, leaving red welts that burned to the touch. "We need to leave," Helen said, her voice steady despite the panic that gripped her. She had come for answers, but some questions, she realized, were best left unasked. They stumbled back through the underbrush, the force a malevolent presence at their heels. It seemed to whisper through the leaves, a language of anger and grief that had no words, only emotions that seared the soul. Greg's camera sprung to life of its own accord, its screen filled with static that coalesced into a face, eyes hollow, mouth open in a silent scream. He dropped it with a shout, and it shattered against the ground, the image vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. They ran, branches tearing at their clothes, roots eager to trip them. The park was alive, a beast with countless arms reaching out to drag them back to the witch's grave. Helen's rational mind reeled, unable to comprehend the breach of every law of physics she held dear. The trail seemed to stretch into infinity, each turn bringing them no closer to safety. And when they finally broke free, bursting onto the main road with lungs burning and hearts pounding, the forest behind them fell silent, the curse satisfied, for now. Back in the safety of their lab, Helen pored over the data, her eyes dark with exhaustion and something else, fear. The numbers told a story of something powerful and angry, a force that defied every explanation. Greg nursed his wounds, the marks on his back a testament to the park's dark history. They had gone in search of truth, armed with science, but what they found was something beyond understanding, a force that was both less and more than a ghost. The story of their encounter spread, a new chapter in the legend of the witch's curse. But for Helen and Greg, the park was no longer just a research site. It was a reminder that not all forces can be seen, that some things refuse to be explained, and that some graves are best left undisturbed. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls outside her window, Helen wonders if the force they felt was the witch's anger or her sorrow, and whether the land would ever be free from the echo of her despair. The Whispering Cave. The discovery was heralded as the find of the century. Beneath the sprawling roots of the park, a network of caves stretched like the veins of the earth itself, its walls etched with the stories of a time long past. Carter, whose life was spent charting the uncharted, felt the familiar thrill of adventure thrumming in his veins. Beside him, Lydia, with her keen anthropological mind, was eager to decode the history of the ancient artwork. The cave entrance yawned wide, a portal to the subterranean world that time had forgotten. The air was cool and damp, clinging to their skin as they descended. Their headlamps pierced the darkness, casting long, dancing shadows against the cavern walls. The paintings were extraordinary, reds and blacks still vibrant with life, depicting scenes of hunting, gathering, and rituals that whispered of the arcane. But as they ventured further, the weight of the earth above seemed to press down upon them, a physical reminder of the descent not just into the cave, but into the bowels of history itself. The silence of the cave was pure and complete, save for the occasional drip of water and the soft shuffle of their footsteps. Then the whispers began, soft and insidious, slithering into their minds like a breeze through dead leaves. At first, they believed it to be an echo of their own breath or the trickling of underground streams. But the whispers grew clearer, words in a language that Lydia's educated ear identified as archaic and long dead. Carter shook his head in disbelief. "Cave acoustics," he murmured, trying to convince himself. Yet, when he closed his eyes, images danced behind his lids, people clad in animal skins, firelight flickering, and shadows writhing on the cave walls. Lydia, too, confessed to seeing visions of a past that felt too real to be mere imagination. The whispers became insistent, urging them onward, deeper into the labyrinth. Each chamber revealed more of the story, and with every step, the line between hallucination and reality blurred. In one haunting tableau, the figures in the paintings seemed to move, acting out a ritual of life and death, a cycle unbroken by time. Lydia reached out, her hand hovering over the ancient mineral paints as if to touch the past itself. "It's not just a cave," Lydia said, her voice trembling. "It's a chronicle, a warning." The ultimate chamber was vast, larger than any they had encountered, with a ceiling lost to the shadows. In the center stood an altar, stone worn smooth by countless hands. Upon it lay a scattering of objects that had no place in the ancient setting. A plastic lighter, a modern watch, a camera, their presence a stark intrusion. "This shouldn't be here," Carter said, his headlamp illuminating the incongruity of the items among the primitive tools and offerings. The whispers crescendoed into voices, commanding them to take their place in the history of the cave. Carter and Lydia found themselves compelled to obey, hands outstretched towards the artifacts as if to offer themselves to the legacy of the cavern. But Lydia paused, the anthropologist within her awakening from the trance. "We're part of it now," she whispered, "part of the cycle. Don't you see? This is how it continues." She snatched her hand back as if burned, her headlamp swinging wildly, casting monstrous shadows. Carter, too, stepped back, the explorer's instinct to survive overpowering the cave's lure. They fled, the whispers chasing them, a cacophony of ancient voices raised in anger. The visions assaulted them, prehistoric predators stalking their steps, specters of past worshippers reaching for them with ethereal hands. The journey back was a battle against both the cave and their own minds, each step an act of defiance against the abyss that beckoned them. When they emerged into the daylight, the world seemed too bright, too real. They sat at the entrance of the cave, the sun warming their chilled skin, the whispers finally silenced. But the cave had marked them. In the days that followed, they could not shake the feeling of being observed, the sensation of unseen eyes upon them. The cave called to them in their dreams, a siren song that promised secrets and terror in equal measure. The items on the altar were analyzed, found to belong to those who had gone missing in the park over the years, each disappearance unexplained until now. Carter and Lydia knew the truth, but who would believe it? The cave was a keeper of secrets, a whisperer of destinies not to be understood, but endured. They never returned to the cave, but sometimes, in the stillness of the night, they would hear it, a whisper carried on the wind, a reminder of the weight of history and the lure of the abyss, of a story that was theirs now, forever etched in the darkness beneath the earth. The man out of time. Dean's hammer fell with the rhythm of routine. Each struck a note in the symphony of renovation. The park's visitor center was a shell of its former self, gutted and waiting for the new skin of progress. Dust danced in the beams of sunlight that breached the plastic sheeting over the windows, the air thick with the scent of sawdust and old secret. Elise arrived like a whisper of the past, her eyes bright with the curiosity of a historian. She was there to ensure that the renovation didn't trample on history. While Dean saw walls to tear down, Elise saw stories to preserve. It was on the third day of work, as Dean pried off the paneling of a forgotten corner, that he found the door, a relic hidden by time, its paint chipped and handle dulled. With a glance at Elise, who nodded eagerly, he turned the handle and stepped into yesterday. The room was a time capsule, undisturbed, a layer of dust like a blanket over everything. Papers, a hat, a watch, all belonged to a man who had vanished in the park's embrace decades ago. Dean picked up the watch, and a chill skittered down his spine. Elise approached, her breath caught between excitement and reverence. "This is his," she said softly, referring to the missing man. "He's like a legend around here." But as Dean wound the watch, the world twisted. The modern chaos of the renovation site melted away, replaced by the park visitor center in its heyday. People bustled around, their clothes from another era. Dean was a specter there, unseen, feeling the echo of the missing man's last moments. He snapped back to the present with a gasp, the watch ticking ominously in his hand. Elise stared at him, her brow furrowed. "Dean, are you all right?" He could only nod, the images seared into his mind. As they sorted through the room, the phenomenon grew. Dean slipped in and out of the past like a record skipping, each time with more intensity. The objects began to behave strangely, moving when they were not touched, aligning to form a map of the park as it once was. Elise watched, her historian's skepticism warring with the evidence of her eyes. It was during one of Dean's slips that he saw it, the missing man, terrified, running from something unseen. Dean followed, the past a labyrinth around him. When he returned to the present, the map was complete, a path drawn by the hand of fate. "I have to follow it," Dean said, a certainty in his voice that scared Elise more than the moving objects. She tried to stop him, but Dean was a man possessed. He followed the path, Elise trailing behind, her pleas lost in the wind. The park transformed around Dean, time peeling back like layers of an onion, each step taking him further from the now. The last slip was absolute. Dean stood in the park, the missing man before him, their eyes meeting in a moment of impossible understanding. Then the man was gone, and Dean was alone, his clothes now vintage, his face unknown to the modern world. Back in the present, Elise found the map. The objects, the room, but not Dean. The park had taken another, the cycle complete. She could feel Dean's presence in the whispers of the trees, a déjà vu that left her trembling. The visitor center was left untouched, the renovation halted. It became a shrine to the missing, to Dean, to the man out of time whose fate he had shared. Time in the park was a circle, a serpent eating its tail, and Dean was now part of the legend, a story to be told by those who followed, each word a monument to the man who slipped through time. The circle of stones. The meadow was a swat of green against the dense browns and greens of the forest, under a sky that held more secrets than it did stars. Leonard had always scoffed at the stories, tales spun by the over-imaginative and those seeking the mysteries of the cosmos on Earth. But Rosa, with eyes wide and mind open, believed that the meadow, known for the strange lights that danced above it, held answers to ancient questions. Together, they stepped into the meadow as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of purple and orange. Leonard's equipment beeped and whirred, a symphony of skepticism aimed at the heavens. Rosa's hand brushed against the rough edge of a stone, one of many that made a near-perfect circle in the heart of the meadow. The first loop was subtle, a sudden chill, a sense of vertigo, and then a feeling of intense déjà vu. Leonard's watch spun backwards for a moment before righting itself. Electromagnetic fields, he muttered, eyeing his instruments. But Rosa felt it in her bones, a displacement, a hiccup in the flow of time. With each loop, the sky above the meadow lit up, colors unseen by the normal eye streaking across the stars. Leonard's disbelief waned as his rational explanations withered in the face of the inexplicable light show. The stones seemed to hum with energy, a vibration that Rosa felt deep in her chest. Each reset sharpened the details. There were shapes in the lights, structures, and patterns that beckoned them to look closer, understand more. Rosa's excitement was a tangible thing, while Leonard's growing anxiety clawed at his throat. "We're not meant to see this," he hissed during one iteration, but Rosa was determined. "I need to know," she insisted, touching the stones again, initiating another loop. And then, without warning, they stood not in the meadow but aboard something else, somewhere else. The lights were all around them, and beings, creatures of light and thought rather than flesh and blood, communicated in bursts of emotion and knowledge. Leonard's instruments were silent, useless relics in the face of such advanced existence. Rosa wept with joy at the confirmation of her beliefs, while Leonard could only stand in awe, his life's work a mere shadow of this new reality. But as quickly as it happened, it was over. The meadow returned, the night sky once more a blanket of darkness, the stones silent and cold to the touch. The loops had ceased, the encounter ended, but the questions multiplied like stars in the universe. They left the meadow, the stones, and the lights behind, their experience a shared secret that burned in their chests. The cosmos had touched them, changed them, and the search for truth had never been more urgent. The meadow remained, quiet and unassuming, the circle of stones a doorway to the heavens that only opened for those who truly sought to understand. Leonard and Rosa had touched the unknown, and the echoes of that touch would resonate through their lives forever. The Mimic. In the heart of the park, where trails twisted like threads through the fabric of the wilderness, Anna and Bella ventured to honor a memory. They were identical in looks, bound by blood, but it was grief that clung to them like the shadows of the trees. They had come to commemorate a friend, lost to the whispers of the forest a year prior. Some said it was the woods that took her, snatching away her voice until only an echo remained. Now, they sought closure, not knowing that the woods held a listener, an entity that feasted on voice and visage alike. The air was still as they walked, but the silence was a cacophony to their strained senses. They spoke little, each lost in a labyrinth of their own sorrows, until the forest itself seemed to speak back. "Anna," the voice was Bella's. Yet Bella hadn't spoken. It beckoned from a fork in the path, a whisper of invitation. Confusion creased Anna's face as she looked to her sister, who shook her head, a denial that deepened the mystery. Bella heard it next, her own name called out in Anna's tones, tugging her gaze toward the underbrush, where shadows danced with possibilities. They clutched each other, fear a tangible thing between them. The mimicry was cruel, splitting them with deceit. Anna ran after the voice that wore her sister's timbre, while Bella chased the echo of her own syllables. The paths they followed were arteries, and the heart of the woods pulsed with malevolent life. They saw each other, or so they thought. Anna faced Bella, her eyes pleading, but the words that spilled from her twin were soured, twisted with anger and accusation. Bella recoiled from Anna, or the thing that took her shape, hurling words laced with bitterness and blame. The forest was alive with their fears, the entity drawing sustenance from their pain, feeding off the guilt they harbored for surviving when their friend did not. It wore their faces, their voices, as easily as one might wear a cloak, and it sought to drive a wedge of madness between them. Night fell, a shroud over the sun, and with it came clarity. They realized the deception, understanding that trust was the only light that could pierce the darkness. They had to believe in each other, in the bond that not even death could sever. The final confrontation was a storm of emotion and reality. The mimic, a tempest that raged with voices stolen from the past. It conjured the image of their lost friend, a specter that wore her smile like a mask. "Can't you save me?" the mimic pleaded, a dagger thrust into their hearts with each word. But Anna and Bella stood firm, their resolve a bastion against the tempest. They spoke in unison, a chant that was a promise, an affirmation of life and remembrance. "You are gone, but not forgotten, and we will not yield to shadows." With those words, the mimic faltered, its illusions dissolving like mist before the rising sun. It was their acceptance, their release of guilt, that weakened it, leaving behind only the echo of their defiance. As dawn painted the sky with strokes of pink and gold, Anna and Bella emerged from the woods, weary but unbroken. They had faced the mimic, an embodiment of their own torment, and they had prevailed. The trails remained, winding paths in a forest that whispered with voices of the past. But the twins knew that some echoes were meant to fade, and some memories to be carried with love, not sorrow. And the mimic, a creature of grief and regret, had no place in the story they would continue to write. The Stolen Night. Zach's camera was his window to the world, a lens through which he captured the mundane and the magnificent alike. Naomi, with her curious mind and eager eyes, was his perfect companion in the quest for the extraordinary. The viewpoint in the park, famous for its sunset panoramas, had become their focus, but not for the light that bathed the hills in gold. They were drawn by the whispers of time lost, of a 5-hour void when the night devoured minutes and hours alike. As dusk painted the sky with streaks of orange and purple, Zach's camera stood vigilant on its tripod, its eye open and unblinking. Naomi, notebook in hand, jotted down thoughts and observations, her pen dancing across the pages. They laughed, dismissing the stories as figments of overactive imaginations, a challenge to be unraveled. But as the stars claimed the heavens, a stillness enveloped them. The night grew thick, a tapestry of shadows that seemed almost alive, pulsing with the heartbeat of the unknown. And then, nothing. The morning greeted them with confusion, the sunlight mocking their disorientation. They woke entwined on the cold ground, symbols that neither recognized inked upon their palms. The camera, its battery drained, offered no explanations, and their memories held only emptiness. Trepidation clawed at Zach as he reviewed the footage, Naomi peering over his shoulder. The screen showed them at the viewpoint, hours passing in a silent vigil, their bodies statuesque, eyes fixed on the celestial dance above. But they were not alone. Figures, darker than the night, stood in a circle around them, indistinct yet unmistakably there. Naomi's breath hitched, a symphony of fear and fascination. Their time hadn't been stolen. It had been claimed, an offering to the shadowy sentinels that now haunted their every thought. As they watched the last frame, a figure detached from the darkness, its form humanoid but wrong, proportions twisted in subtle, unsettling ways. It stepped toward the camera, a hand reaching out to the lens, and then blackness. The after effects of that night were subtle yet undeniable. Zach found himself waking at 3 a.m., drawn to the windows to gaze at the sky, an act he couldn't explain. Naomi hummed a melody that neither had ever heard, a tune that seemed to echo from the depths of the earth. They returned to the viewpoint by day, the sun a comforting companion, but the symbols on their hands remained, a brand of their encounter. The ground held no sign of their nocturnal visitors, only the wild grass swaying in the breeze. Whispers followed them in the streets, laughter tickled their ears in empty rooms, and the symbols itched, a constant reminder of the night they had lost. Zach watched the footage again, pausing on the shadowy figure, its hand reaching out. He realized it wasn't just reaching for the camera, it was reaching for them, through time and space, a connection unbroken by daylight. As they slept, they dreamed of stars and voids, of silhouettes against the sky, each dream a piece of the puzzle they no longer wished to solve. They knew now that some things were beyond the realm of cameras and notebooks, lying in wait where curiosity dared to tread. The viewpoint remained picturesque, a canvas of natural beauty, but at night it held a secret, a slice of time forever out of reach, stolen by the watchers who claimed the darkness as their own. The park's heart. The wilds of the park were Avery's second home, each tree a familiar landmark, every whispering wind a known voice. Marco, on the other hand, was a tapestry of nerves and excitement, his boots still clean, his eyes wide with the raw beauty of nature. They ventured beyond where the trails dared to sketch, into a realm where compasses spun aimlessly and the brave felt fear. Their mission was to find a hiker, one who had laughed in the face of caution and had been swallowed by the green abyss. Avery had seen this before, people disappearing as if the park had inhaled them, leaving no trace but the echo of their steps. The deeper they ventured, the thicker the air became, a humid grasp that clung to their skin. Birds fell silent as they progressed, and the gentle rustle of wildlife turned to a heavy stillness. And then, without warning, the sun vanished from the sky, not set nor obscured by clouds, but erased as if it had never been. In the gloom, the forest transformed. The trees contorted into grotesque silhouettes, and the path beneath their feet pulsed softly, a heartbeat of the earth that was out of sync with their own. There, Marco pointed to a glade where the ground itself undulated, a living, breathing mass that throbbed with a sickly cadence. It was veined and slick, an organic entity that seemed as ancient as the earth itself. Roots extended from it like tentacles, burrowing into the soil, the trees intertwining with the very fabric of the park. The wildlife had changed, too. Deer with too many eyes watched them from behind twisted trunks, and birds with scales instead of feathers circled above, a guard of honor for the park's dark heart. Avery reached for the radio, but static met his call. Marco's hand hovered above the mass, a morbid curiosity glinting in his eyes, but Avery knocked it aside. "We don't touch the unknown so carelessly," he warned. They knew then that the hiker they sought was beyond their reach, claimed by the park's heart, a sacrifice or a convert to its arcane rituals. The decision to leave, to conceal the truth of their find, weighed on them. To speak of it would invite chaos, questions that would lead others to this unnatural pulsing core. The park had to be preserved, its secrets kept, its heart beating in the dark, unseen. They emerged from the wilderness with concocted tales of trails searched and the sad shake of the head that meant another soul lost. But the sun had returned, a glaring eye that bore into them, an accusation for the tale they wove. Sleep eluded Avery, his dreams invaded by the mass, its pulse a drumbeat that called to him, urging him to return, to join the dance of the deformed wildlife. Marco grew distant, his once eager gaze dulled by the shadows of what they'd seen. The park continued to breathe, to consume, its heart beating a rhythm that thrummed beneath the surface. Avery and Marco, bound by their secret, watched the trees with wary eyes, knowing they stood at the edge of a deeper world, where humanity was but a visitor and the park was a living entity, timeless and voracious. And sometimes, in the depths of the night, if one listened closely, they could hear the heartbeat of the park, a pulse that promised wonders and horrors intertwined. A song of the earth that sang of the ancient, sentient heart that lay hidden in its depths.